Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, the Northside Numbers Game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like The Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, and Baseball Rabbit Hole. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available ad-free to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus, where you can support the show for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus, the spin on the baseball metric OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it? Please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share this episode with a friend. It's August 7th, 2024, and the Cubs are 56-60 and set to take on the Twins in the rubber game of this homestand. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Greg Huss from the Cubs on Deck podcast and Northside Bound. We chop it up about the state of the farm system and how that could play into success for 2025 and beyond. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Welcome into episode 85, the Trent Giambrone episode of this podcast. And right on cue, I've got Greg Huss. Greg, you remember Trent?
I love the giant trombone. Shout out Trent Giambrone.
That was excellent. I remember him a little bit. He played with the Cubs in 2021, I think. I had that in front of me a second ago.
Yeah, I think he came up as a part of the promotion, the wave of promotions at the end of the year after the all the big trade deadline, right? He was part of the. I think Tyler Payne got a promotion at the tail end of the year too. So he was a fun name.
It looks like I didn't realize he was in the Cubs system for as long as he was until he came up. Looks like he came up pretty quickly.
He was around for a while. He was around for a while, that's for sure.
Yeah, cool. So welcome back to the pod. I think we got some cool stuff to talk about today. So I know we've all kind of separately hit the draft and the trade deadline and all that. We'll hit a couple of those things, but I want to take the next step then and talk about how this leads into making the Cubs actually competitive in 2025. I mean, that's basically where we are at this point. But to get started, give me your thoughts on the trade deadline real quick. I know, I don't know that we have to spend much time on the Morel and Paredes deal. I think we're all kind of sad to see Morel go. But what do you think of the guys the Cubs got back, and who do you think is potentially likely to pop?
Yeah, you look at the trade deadline. I don't think it can be viewed as a win or a loss. Obviously, I mean, it never can with a trade immediately. But like, it's just so much. Just like you're kind of bringing some guys in that might help you in the next few years. You're trading some guys away that might have helped you in the next few years. It feels like you're just kind of shifting things around to a certain degree here. Mm-hmm. So as far as the guys they brought in, I pointed this out on Twitter that it's an interesting, like, you can directly compare a few of these guys, right? You can directly compare Chris Morel with Isak Paredes in the next few years, like who ends up getting the better of those two guys. You can directly compare Hunter Biggie, who was traded away as a part of that Paredes deal, and then also Jack Neely, who was a part of the Mark Leiter Jr. deal. Like those two guys are direct comparisons. They go about it in different ways, obviously, but guys that are in AAA, ready for the major leagues in a bullpen role. So you can kind of compare those two. You even got like Ben Cowles, who was acquired as a part of that Mark Leiter Jr. deal. He can be directly compared to Josh Rivera, who was a part of the Nate Pearson deal. So like, there's just a lot of guys that, like, I think we're gonna have a pretty good idea in a few years at who won this trade, because they are those direct comparisons with one another.
Really, across the deals, it seemed to me like they really wanted Paredes. And then what do we have to do to make that happen? And how do we get the parts back that we gave up in that deal?
Yeah, that's the vibe it gives off for sure. And I think that dealing with the Rays is always an interesting thing. I mean, I am as big of a Christopher Morel fan as they come. I think the energy that he brings to the ballpark, he was a fan favorite for a reason, and the fact that he was a fan favorite despite the numbers that he was putting up is pretty impressive. That goes to show like how beloved he was as a part of this ball club. So from that perspective, Isak Paredes has big shoes to fill.
It does.
We know that the production is there way more than Christopher Morel was. So, but because of that, because Chris Morel brings that energy and brings that how loved he was, Isak Paredes is going to have to perform better than what he probably should just to win fans over. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
he could be a great player and it still might not win fans over, which is crazy. Yeah, it seems like they really wanted Isak Paredes, and they were willing to part with three really good players, and Chris Morel, who still has a lot of potential, obviously, and
Hmm.
Hunter Biggie, who is, I think that he will thrive. I think he will thrive with the Tampa
Oh,
Bay
for
Rays.
sure.
I thought he'd do really well with the Cubs. I think he'll thrive with the Rays. And Ty Johnson is not a throw into that deal at all. Like, I think that, like, because Ty Johnson was not ranked on top 30 prospect rankings
Hmm.
going into the trade deadline season, which is silly. I had Ty Johnson ranked, I think, 21 in the organization. But there's a legit argument to make that outside of Cade Horton and Jackson Wiggins, that Ty Johnson was the third best prospect, pitching prospect in this organization. And I'd make the argument that Hunter Biggie was the fourth.
Yeah.
So giving up your third and fourth best pitching prospects is no just toss into the deal.
It was interesting. I was listening to you and Brian Smith talk about specifically those two guys, and I think you both said that basically you put out your rankings and then we're kind of rethinking like maybe we didn't have Ty Johnson high enough. I think
Yeah,
was
yeah.
it Brian that said he would have him maybe in the upper teens potentially.
I think Brian said he'd have him in the upper teams. I came out and had him at like I said 21. I think is where I had him,
Hmm.
and I think Brian was like why does Greg have him at 21? And then he like dug more in depth into his outings, and he was like, Greg's too low on him. He's like he needs to have him even higher. So yeah, Ty Johnson. I'm biased. He's a Ball State guy. That's my alma mater.
Yeah.
So I loved having Ty Johnson in this organization. I think he'll do well, whether it's as a starter or reliever in Tampa. I think he'll do well.
Yeah. So let's talk about the promotions too. So we saw some big names coming up to Iowa. Like talk through that and what that means both for the system and for what's behind it too.
Yeah, so there's a big three that came up. Matt Shaw, James Triantos, and Kevin Alcantara all made their way up to AAA Iowa. That now puts 6 of the top 7. You could argue the top 6 prospects in the Cubs organization, all at the AAA level. That is, they're all 6 guys are consensus top 100
Hmm.
prospects in all of baseball. This is the wave that we have been waiting on in Chicago. It's not Matt Mervis. It's not insert who even Ben Brown or Jordan Wicks. Like, this is it. Like, this is what we've been waiting on, is this wave of legit top 100 prospects making their way to Chicago. The fact that I know Cade Horton's still injured right now, so we're waiting on him to come
Hmm.
back from injury. But the fact that we can watch 5 of these dudes in the lineup every single day, in Matt Shaw, James Triantos, Owen Casey, Moises Ballesteros, and did I say Kevin Alcantara?
Yes.
The 5 other prospects, they're all there in the lineup, and the fact that I can lose track of the top prospects at AAA is pretty fun. But I don't know. I talked about it with Sam Wiederhaft on my show this past week, and Sam was talking about how he got a good mix of this like next good group of Cubs prospects in Chicago. He got a glimpse of them in Myrtle Beach back in 2022.
Hmm.
And now they've all kind of progressed in the way that we wanted them to, even including guys like Luke Little and Porter Hodge Porter Hodge has been great in Chicago for the most part. That group has progressed together for the most part. All of them started off the year in AA Tennessee. So
Yeah.
as excited as we were about them in Tennessee, they've done enough to now be promoted up to AAA Iowa. And I don't know, man. It's fun for me as a prospect guy to have. It's fun to talk about guys down in Myrtle Beach and South Bend and the lower levels of the minors, but like it is just so much fun for these guys to be a step away from
Hmm.
Chicago, and like the major league fans are super interested. The prospect guys are super interested. Like that's AAA is like that's where
Yes.
the everything comes together.
What and we've seen with I think PCA is kind of a good example of maybe what's to come. I mean, he probably came up maybe arguably a month or two too early, but he had to because of the injuries. We saw the struggles, but over the last like 5 weeks, I mean, you could almost see him getting better game by game. I mean, his offensive approach has improved so much, and that's what all these guys are going to have. Like I think we got spoiled with. Although I guess even with Chris Bryant, he didn't hit a homer for 30 games when he came up, which is kind of easy to forget. But like Major League pitching's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, PCA is hitting the ball harder. He's swinging at more strikes. He's doing everything he needs to do to improve at the plate. And I don't know, man. It cracks me up because it's like he came up and over the course of his first however many plate appearances, he sucked at the plate, right? And people are like, oh, is he not legit? It's like, How on earth? How
We
on
were
earth
saying
could
that
you
at the end of
possibly know?
last year after 14 plate appearances. It was
After
insane.
4 and I spent all offseason saying, "Don't freak out, don't freak out, everybody calm down." And then he came in and performed poorly again to start out this year, which is fine.
Major
And
League pitching's hard.
it's hard, man. And like my thing is like what I've been kind of reiterating is that like PCA can be a below league average hitter
Mhm.
and still be super, super valuable. If he can get up to league average, that's awesome. If he can get up to above league average, then that is tremendous. That's all-star, like one of the players that every team would love to have on their roster type of situation. And I don't know. He's just putting it all together, honestly, way quicker than I expected. What he's doing right now, and again, small sample size for the good stuff, as well as
Mhm.
small sample size for the bad stuff. But like, I didn't expect him to be doing what he's been doing the past few weeks this quickly. Like,
No.
if you had expectations of him being a league average bat by the end of this year, like I would have called you crazy, you
Yeah.
know. And so like, if he can do that by the end of this year, if his numbers can be slightly below league average at the end of his first full season in the majors, sign me up, man. Sign me up immediately.
I mean, I saw a tweet. I think it was actually from a Cardinals fan, but it was floating in all the Cubs circles. They were trying to show how much better Jordan Walker was than PCA, and they
hmm
pulled like I think it was Baseball Reference, and they pulled the numbers. And of course, Jordan Walker's hitting better at the time because this was before the hot streak. And at the time, PCA was either an OPS plus or a WRC plus of like 52, and he had
hmm
1.1 WAR, where they were showing
Yeah.
how much better Jordan Walker was, but he had negative -0.1 WAR. I mean, that defensive
Yeah.
value was so big.
Yeah, I mean, those are polar opposite players, right? Is it
Oh
like
yeah,
Jordan Walker can't play a lick of defense. So,
yeah, he better hit a
yeah,
ton.
it's yeah, like I think that I saw some comparisons between him and again Cardinals Mike Ciani in
Yeah,
center field. It's like that's a better compare. I mean,
it is.
Mike Ciani was not the prospect PCA is,
No.
but like Mike Ciani is a glove first center
Hmm.
fielder and all that good stuff. It's like I, comparing PCA and Jordan Walker is like not even the same. It doesn't even make any sense. Like I can't even comprehend that comparison, you know?
It just made me laugh, and it made the WAR value pop. Like it just showed that we watch
Yeah,
PCA in the
true.
outfield. We see how much ground he covers. It's unreal. I remember when I
Yeah.
think it was a week or two ago, PCA just got a day off, and Mike Talkman was in center field. And we've seen Talkman play good center field. I mean, he had that game-saving home run catch against the Cardinals last year, and he just looked like he was running in quicksand. I got so used to watching PCA out there.
Yeah. I mean, I know we saw the defensive miscue between him and Nico recently. Oh well, like that, like okay,
That's
but
learning process.
that's been talked about way more than something ever should. If that happened in the second inning of a 5-1 game, nobody would have cared. No,
Yeah.
I think that I feel just extraordinarily confident every time the ball goes in the air anywhere near center field. That's how much confidence I have in Pete Crow Armstrong. I think he's just so damn good out there. I think that he's figured out on the base for how aggressive Pete Crow Armstrong was on the base paths during his minor league career. I was on the record and saying like that's something that will never go away in terms of like his
Yeah.
aggressiveness and him getting caught stealing on the bases and him picked off and stuff like that. But he's done it. Like he's got that out of his game. Is his streak still going on?
Hmm.
Of
Yep.
without being caught. He's at 22, I believe now
21 or 22.
21.
21 or 22. I can't
And
remember
so
which.
but he has not been caught stealing since early September of last year, minor
Yep.
leagues or major leagues, which is
And
outrageous. He's over 30 straight stolen bases.
and you're right. He's so aggressive. Eventually, he's just going to get like blatantly picked off, and it's going to look like the dumbest play ever. But it's fine because
Yeah, yeah. And apparently he can just coach it out of himself that won't actually happen ever again. So I don't know.
I mean, the adjustments are incredible. But let's
Yeah.
build from PCA. So this year we saw PCA, Jordan Wicks, Ben Brown, and Michael Bush graduate off the prospect list. So they're not prospects anymore. We saw the prospect ranking drop, which was all the hoopla especially because the ESPN one was going around, which took him down to 12. I saw Fangraphs has him at 7, and MLB Pipeline has him still at 4. So there's still a lot of depth and talent in the system. One thing I wanted to flip to, and I'm going to try to do a screen share here. I've never done this. I'm pretty much an audio podcast, but we'll try it. I had sent you the link the other day. We're going to take a look at the Cubs prospects from 2019, just as a way to kind of walk through how this looks like 5 years later. So just look at the top of the list at the time for those that are audio only. Miguel Amaya was number 1, Nico Horner, Braylon Marquez, Edward Alzolay, Cole Roederer, Aramis Adaman, Brennan Davis, Justin Steele, and Corey Abbott, basically the top 10. And you look up and down the top 30. What'd you count the other day? Well, we got
I think it was
6, 7 major leaguers out. No, we got more than that. 16 major leaguers?
Yeah, I think it was 16, but that's also including several dudes that like played like a game, like single game. So yeah,
but scanning down
that's a weird circumstance.
Yeah, and scanning down the list after that, we got Keegan Thompson, Zach Short, Alex Lang was in the bigs for a while. Thomas Hatch has played for a couple teams. Tyson Miller, who's back with the Cubs now, was on the list then.
Yep.
So it's interesting to see, because I think we have this sense that that basically you're a top prospect or you're just not going to be good enough. And that's just not necessarily how it works. Like, these guys come up and provide depth in a lot of different ways.
I was going to say, I mean, you look at that prospect list from 2019 and like it's, you can classify it as bad, right? Like that's a rough ranking. But at the same time, like I mentioned, I count 16 or whatever it was, guys that have made their MLB debut, and like a good prospect list in my eyes needs to have the upside, like the talent at the upper level, like that top 100 legitimate, like everyday major league player upside. But it also needs to have depth. Right now, if you compare that list in 2019 to a list right now in 2024, and the reason why you're seeing the Cubs rankings fall down in terms of system-wide rankings is right now there's no depth. There's no depth right now at all. So the Cubs right now have 7 top 100 prospects in all of baseball. Let me see if I can rattle off. You got Cade Horton, you got Kevin Alcantara, you got Owen Casey, you got Moises Ballesteros, you got Jefferson Rojas, James Triantos, and Matt Shaw. You have 7 top 100 guys that are pretty much consensus top 100 guys. No matter where you look, they're going to be top 100 guys. Outside of that, it's rough, right? I mean, I think there's a mix of guys after that where you got Will Sanders, you got Christian Franklin, you got Jackson Wiggins. There's other guys that like that's your depth. But then, man, after you get past like 15 on the current rankings, it becomes a crapshoot. And there's a lot of guys that just simply won't make their MLB debuts. Like if you look at the rankings right now, I would actually bet the under 16 in terms of a top 30 rankings, under 16 guys that make their MLB debut. And so like that's where, especially with ESPN, Kyler McDaniel at ESPN does a really, really good job of, he like calculates prospect or like system rankings based on like WAR, like projected WAR, and like the value that comes from that in terms of like money wise. And a lot of that, like what's propped up the Cubs in recent years, he was, if I remember right, he was high on the Cubs when a lot of other outlets were super low. Like when the Cubs were like ranked 20 through 30 in a lot of other outlets, Kyler McDaniel had them around like 15 or so. And that was because they had a lot of depth, even when the organization wasn't as impressive at the top end. Right now, the top end is super impressive. The bottom half is less than that.
Well, and we were looking at this like the end of last season, mid-season last year. You start throwing some of those guys back on it. There was depth at that point. Now we've taken some guys off, and hopefully the development system will have a couple guys pop and be back at it next year. But the other thing I wanted to point out from
last year.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, last year, like you mentioned the Jordan Wicks and Ben Brown and Michael Bush, or you could look at Zaire Hope and Jackson Farris, who went to the Dodgers as a part of the Michael Bush deal. The Cubs had a lot of guys. Like they at one point, they had 11-ish, 10, 11, 12 guys that were all top 150 prospects in baseball. They were not the top 100 guys, but at the time, they had about 11 dudes that were top 150 to top 200. And so, like, at that time, I think PCA was really the only guy that was top 30 in all of baseball. But then you had a whole bunch of guys ranked basically between, like, 60 and 150. Some of those guys graduated, and the rest of the guys kind of shot up lists. And, like, that's kind of exactly what you want to see from that group of 11. You want to see them graduate, and you want to see them get better. They did that.
Well, the one thing I like now, seeing so many of the guys at the top or the depth we had before this, is, like, you look at that 2019 list, and we all loved Miguel Amaya, and he was just crushed by injuries for 3 seasons. Took out so much of his development. Braylon Marquez still hasn't made it back. would just see today, Adbert Alzolay was announced he's going to get Tommy John surgery. So he's out for certainly this season, probably most, if not all of next. So, I mean, and Brennan Davis is on the list too. Obviously his ongoing back injuries. Go back to last year. I don't know that he ever actually made a top 100, but Alexander Canario has had so many injury problems ever since he had that fall in the Winter League. And you just can't count on these guys to stay healthy. So it's good to have a lot of shots.
Yeah, the health is a problem, and when you're going off of a list that doesn't have any top 100 guys, I think that in 2019, Miguel Amaya might have been a top 100 guy in 2019, and Nico Horner might have been. But even if they were, they were like sneaking in. They were sneaking into the back end of the top 100. That's what happens, is when you have a whole bunch of dudes that are not expected to be everyday starters. Like Nico and Miguel Amaya at that time were. But I even back then, I didn't really project Miguel Amaya to be an everyday starting catcher for a playoff caliber team. And so you need to have some of that everyday talent in your farm system. And the Cubs didn't for about 7 years or so, I'd say.
Yeah.
And they still haven't, as they've been calling guys up recently, until this year, until they called up Pete Armstrong and Jordan Wicks and Ben Brown. Like, those are the guys. And I keep referencing back to Matt Mervis, because last year when Matt Mervis came up, like, people thought Matt Mervis was the savior. And it's like, I didn't even have Matt Mervis ranked in the top 10 guys in the system, let alone top 100 in all of baseball. And so, like, Cubs fans were like craving, we were just craving some sort of like prospect, like to come show out in Chicago.
Yep.
And like, unfortunately, it got pegged on Matt Mervis to be that guy. It's like, he did not deserve that.
He didn't.
He did not deserve those expectations placed on him. Now,
he also should have gotten more opportunity.
He should have gotten more opportunity. You're right. You're right about that. And when Owen Casey eventually makes his debut, when Matt Shaw eventually makes his debut, you can look at those guys and say, those are a cornerstone of our organization for years to come. Mm-hmm. Those are the guys that we can put expectations on as being everyday players. But Alexander Canario and Matt Mervis and Luis Vasquez, like, that's not it.
Nelson Velasquez, same.
Nelson Velasquez, yeah, it's a good example. Yeah.
I like them all. I mean, they're fun, but
yeah, I think they serve a great purpose. I think that Alexander Canario, I think that if he's healthy, I think he serves a great purpose where he can be a fourth outfielder in the major leagues. Maybe not Chicago, but in the major leagues. I think that Nelson Velasquez being a lefty masher, I thought that you need guys like that. And looking down this 2019 list, like Adbert Alzolay was on that list. You got Justin Steele was further down it, but like, you need guys like Corey Abbott to serve as depth for your bullpen and your rotation down in AAA. Zach Short has bounced around the league quite a bit, but like, teams keep taking a gamble on him because he brings versatility to a major league bench. Alex Lang performed well in the bullpen for a little bit. Brennan Little was really good MLB bullpen depth down in AAA. You need that in case something goes wrong. Tyson Miller has shown out as a middle reliever. Trent Giambrone, who we led off the show with, like, he was a guy that's again served a purpose in AAA as depth in case something went wrong. So like, those guys they're needed. You can't just only bring up stars. You can't only bring up stud players. You need to have both. You need to have both types of players from within your organization. Or if you're not bringing up the Zach Shorts of the world, then you're out signing the Daniel Descalsos of the world. And you don't want that. You don't want to be spending $4 million a year on Daniel Descalso to play for your baseball team. You would rather spend it on a cheap homegrown player that can put up a similar performance level,
For sure. Well, and that leads me into the next step. So where the Cubs sit in 2024, I think everybody would say this is a disappointing season so far unless they go on a crazy run. I don't know what you thought, but I predicted them to win 90 games. I thought they had that kind of talent on the team. It's not come together, even though the pitching's been honestly better than I expected. And we're in a situation now where Jed Hoyer, I don't know what Tom's thinking, but they haven't extended him yet. He's heading into his last year as president of baseball ops. I'm going to have to think, I know fans like to point to Tom doesn't care. He likes Jed. I can agree to a point that Tom is only going to ever spend so much, but there's no chance that Tom wants to spend twice as much as everybody else in the division to finish last.
Yeah.
There's just no shot.
That's a good point. It gets all it comes down to is what we've been talking about all year, and what we've been talking about all offseason, is that you can't spend 20 mil a year, 15 to 20 million a year on 6 different players to be above average baseball
Mhm.
players. You just can't do that. Like
You
you
need a
have to
couple,
get
but you don't need 6.
you need a couple. You can spend money on a few of those guys. But you need some of those to come from within your system
Mhm.
so that you can go out and spend money on one like legit middle of your batman. You need the one legit middle. You need the one Soto, the one
Yep.
whatever. Again, like take your pick of who it might be. Not and but it needs to be like the one. That's where being the Chicago Cubs comes into play. It needs to be Juan Soto. It can't be Pete Alonso. You can't go
No.
out and sign Pete Alonso this offseason and be like, there's your middle of the order bat. Like, no. It's got to be, if you're the Chicago Cubs, it's got to be a Juan Soto. It's got to be a guy like, it's got to be Bryce Harper from a few years ago. It's got to be that type of guy. And then you hope you can get out of Owen Casey or out of Matt Shaw that like 110 to 120 WRC plus. So you're not having to spend $15 to $20 million on a 110 to 120 WRC plus from Ian Happ or whoever. And take your pick.
And
Isak Paredes.
yes. And to get there from here, I mean, Soto's obviously the one big, huge dog this offseason. Every team's going to want him. So, I mean, he's going to have his pick. Hopefully the Cubs are heavy bidders. I think if the Cubs come in with the biggest offer, they're going to have every shot to sign him because I think Juan Soto is going to take the biggest deal put on the table. But beyond that, like to your point, they look around this team. You got Seiya Suzuki, Ian Happ. Now I think Seiya could be better than a little bit above average player if he didn't miss a month and a half every single season. Ian Happ, Paredes, Michael Busch is fine. He's cost controlled, and I think he's going to get even better than where he is. Nico Horner offensively I think he's kind of maxed out. He's good. He's fine, but Dansby's not going to give you much more than we saw last year, probably. So where are we going to put the upgrades? And also, well, there's probably one more season with this kind of class of prospects at AAA because the 3 guys we said got promoted have been there for 1 game, 2 games at this point. At some point, you either have to use them or let them go. One thing that I'd like to get your perspective on this with prospects is they're kind of a perishable asset. I mean, I hate to use like non-human terms, but they have value until that guy starts turning 26, 27. He hasn't been to the bigs yet. And everybody else is like, why isn't this guy been to the bigs? And being blocked by Nico Horner and Isak Paredes might not be good enough answer.
Yeah, I think what helps significantly with the prospects right now and that group of guys that are in AAA is that trade for Isak Paredes, giving away Christopher Morel as a part of that trade. Like Christopher Morel was taking up a DH spot, and Isak Paredes is taking up the third base spot. There's a big difference between that. And so, like, if you were to call up Owen Casey or Matt Shaw or James Triantos, then maybe they can slot in the DH. Or what I'd rather see, like, you can put Owen Casey in right field and move Seiya Suzuki and his defense to the DH slot.
Yep.
I think I feel very confident that Owen Casey's a better outfielder than Seiya Suzuki. I know that there's a lot of not anger. There's a lot of calls for Owen Casey to be moved to first base when he was like a 19-year-old kid in low A. I thought that was absolutely absurd. I thought that was ridiculous when that was happening.
I think you made a really good point.
Sure enough, he got better out there.
You made a really good point on one of your last 2 pods talking about Owen Casey and the environments he grew up playing defense in. You want to walk through that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Owen Casey was drafted he was a Canadian kid growing up. He was playing outside, not as often as kids from Florida are playing outside. So he's learning to take fly balls inside warehouses and inside gyms. And reading fly balls, you need to be out there on the ball field, taking fly balls, learning how to track fly balls and take routes there. It is just the transition. He just needed more time. He needed more reps. Yeah. And sure enough, he got more reps. He got more athletic. He did all the things necessary to be a good right fielder. I don't think that like he's not Jason Hayward out there playing defense, but he's definitely not Seiya Suzuki out there, in my opinion. So, I think that it's important. I think you bring up a good point as far as like you have, like we said, there's 5 position player prospects that are top 100 guys in Iowa right now. and they can't all play in Chicago next year and perform in a way that's going to get you a 130 WRC plus. It's just not going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like the club needs to be supplemented with Owen Casey. You can't put expectations, even though he's eventually going to be a dude, right? I think Owen Casey is going to be a dude in the major leagues. His rookie year, you can't expect him to be an all-star.
No.
And so you're going to get more of Owen Casey and Matt Shaw and James Triantos next year and Moises Ballesteros. You're going to get more of those guys performing not that much different than what you're getting from Ian Happ right now, or not that much different from what you're getting from Nico Warner or from whoever else, you know what I mean? And so I think that that's important to keep in mind, that if you're moving on from Ian Happ, if he waives his no trade clause and you find a way to move on from Ian Happ and you just slot in with Casey, like that's not an upgrade right off the bat.
No.
Now down the road, it may be an upgrade, but it's not an upgrade right off the bat. So you're going to have to bring in somebody that maybe that is Juan Soto to DH for you or whatever it might be. You're going to have to just be a better ball club in other ways and can't rely on the prospects to impact the club right away. I went on with the setup man earlier this offseason, and he was asking me about prospects that could impact Chicago this year and like make a difference for like a playoff run. This was earlier on when playoff hopes were maybe a little bit higher. And I felt bad because I didn't have an answer. My answer was none. Like I didn't think there was any prospects. Moises Ballesteros might be more than anybody else that guy that might help like make an impact right away next year.
Okay.
But my bet would be Moises Ballesteros more than anybody else, just because of the way that he hits. And expectations still shouldn't be put on him to be like the savior starting in his rookie season.
Well, and that's the point. Like, these are good prospects, but Chris Bryant was the number one prospect in baseball. Javi Baez, by the time he came up, was top 6, I think. And like, that's kind of where like the Baltimore Orioles are when they've got Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman and Jackson Holiday, like big impact players. And the Cubs need to find a way to get that another way, whether it's opening spots by trading Nico Hoerner and getting value back. Maybe you make a trade for, if you can't get Juan Soto, maybe you trade for Vlad Guerrero Jr. and see if you can extend him past 2025. I mean, I think you're right. Like 1 or 2 more big pieces in this lineup really start to open the way for kids to come up. Because like we saw from PCA, they're going to come up and struggle. Even Michael Busch, as good as he was to start the season, hit that inevitable point where pitchers start to get a book on him and they start to figure him out for a while. And he went through, a month slump, and then he battled back because he's a good ball player.
Yeah, and look at Michael Busch is a good example where like he got tastes of the bigs prior to this year. Like it wasn't like he was close to graduating from prospect status as soon as he came over to the Cubs. And so like he got plenty of taste. There's a huge difference between a top 10 prospect in baseball and a guy that's like 50 to 100. Huge difference between that. And that's where like James Triantos and Owen Casey's been up as high as like 30 or so. Matt Shaw's been up as high as like 20, 25 or so. But you can't expect to slot these guys in right away. Jordan Westburg for the Baltimore Orioles, you brought up Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson for the Orioles. Jordan Westburg is a really good example of that, where like Jordan Westburg was a top 100 prospect in baseball, but he was not an Adley Rutschman or a Gunnar Henderson.
Right.
And so with Jordan Westburg, like he was an all-star this year, but he came up last year, and you got to get some comfort in there before you really take off. And like I think Jordan Westburg, like his situation should be what is used as a blueprint for like James Triantos, Matt Shaw, Moises Ballesteros, Owen Casey, Kevin Alcantara, even so with him too.
And one of my frustrations especially over the last maybe calendar year, is I know coming off the 2021, 2022, there just wasn't a lot of talent in Chicago, so you had to try some guys out. But like at the end of 2022, I brought up Matt Mervis. Like he never got that exposure at the end of a kind of a lousy season to just get that taste, like you were saying. So he got that taste last year with a bunch of pressure on him. And then in the middle of a playoff race, Bellinger gets hurt. There's no time at first base and he gets no more run. I've been frustrated this year to continue to see, and no offense to any of the guys, I like them all in different ways, but the bench made up of Mastroboni and Madrigal and Wisdom, like let's get some of these other guys up, give them a taste. Like what the Cubs did with Kyle Schwarber and Wilson Contreras back in the day, like, bring them up, get a week or two where you're playing 3-4 times a week, and then for an injury and then go back down versus we'll just continue to roll the same stuff out there every day.
Yeah, I think part of that problem is the Cubs are in this is year 5, year 4, year whatever it is, whenever you said the rebuild started, right? But
It's like
this
year 4
is a
of the
rebuild that's
non-rebuild.
not a rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a rebuild that's not a rebuild. So like Jed Foyer and company are trying to convince a fan base that they are not tanking, right? And so like if you're not tanking, then you have to put a decent product out there, and a decent product that's quote unquote competing for a playoff spot. Well, that means that you can't give Matt Mervis run to struggle for a month.
True.
And I didn't want them to full on rebuild. Like, don't get me wrong, I didn't want them to tank it like the Orioles did before they got good, or the White Sox are now. Like, I didn't want them to do that. But that's kind of the problem. Where like if you're not actually tanking, if you're not actually rebuilding, then you don't give Matt Mervis a chance. And Matt Mervis may have not panned out anyways, and that's fine. But we would have known and truly known at the major league level sooner.
And that's really the point. It's not that I think Matt Mervis was necessarily going to be the guy, but we just never found out really. And like we saw, I think as overmatched as he looked at the end of last season, I've got to think with what PCA is doing now, those 14, 19 plate appearances, that gave him something tangible to work on over the offseason. Like, 100%. I'm getting blown up by Major League fastballs. I got to figure this out.
100%. You're exactly right. You're exactly right on that.
And so I'm hoping, especially if hopefully the Cubs don't fall further out of the race. But if they do, I hope we start to see, especially like Owen Casey, he's Rule 5, right? He's got to be added to the 40-man by December.
Owen Casey this year does need to be added to the Rule 5, I believe, this year. This is his first season. Yeah.
Yeah. So if take some of those guys, get them up, work them in a little bit. Doesn't have to be every day. We're already past the point. You don't want to bring up Owen Casey in May and have him play once a week on the bench. That's a waste. But as you get to the end of the season.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but there's a fine line between that, right? Like because you can't pull an Alexander Canario and play him only 3 times a week.
No, absolutely.
You know, like Canario is playing fewer than that, but like I don't think you can promote maybe the tail end of the year. That's okay.
I'm thinking maybe like
now you could
September, maybe end of August if they're out of it.
Yeah, when their minor league season is like essentially over anyways, like at that point, that makes sense. But I don't want them calling up Moises Ballesteros and playing them 3 days a week. I think that you gain more from AAA at that point. But if he's playing 4, 5, 6 times a week, then of course, like expose him to that level of play for sure.
It'll be interesting. Did you see today that Bellinger's out of the lineup because he hurt the hamstring last night?
Oh, I haven't seen that yet. No.
So right now he didn't start today. They're saying it's day by day. Hopefully it's not one of those scenarios where he sits out 10 games and without going on the IL. But if he were to go on the IL, it'd be interesting now to see, do you bring up Casey or bring up Moises and let him DH?
So I'm more on the Moises train. I think that Owen Casey, I'd love to see Owen Casey play out the rest of the year in AAA. Okay. I would love him to play out the rest of the year in AAA. He still needs to kind of, he has shown power. He's shown ability to put the ball in play. He's shown that he's limited strikeouts. I just want him to continue to ball all that together and do it all at the same time. And he hasn't quite done that until he masters that, which the numbers are still great throughout the year because he's done each of those things at different times. But until he does all of those at the same time, let's just keep riding it out in AAA for now. Like there's no rush, I'd say. This is more of a development thing with Owen Casey. Moises Ballesteros, I think that I don't know. He's gonna have to really knock down the door. Like he's gonna have to really say like bring me up now. And he's not saying that exactly quite yet in AAA, in my opinion. So I don't know. I think that the more likely scenario, I think that that group of guys still maintains their position at AAA for right now. I don't think the Cody Bellinger move makes that happen because I think that an injury won't make any of those guys get called up. I think that they'll be called up when it's time for them to be called up, and they're taking more at bats from Mike Tauchman, or they're taking more at bats from whoever, from Miggy Amaya.
It's also been unfortunate this year. There have been several times where there was an opportunity in Chicago, and the guy that seemed like the obvious call up wound up getting hurt. That happened to Canario.
Yeah,
I think 2 different times. Happened to Vasquez once.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yeah, the Iowa infield is rough right now because Matt Mervis at first base is on the IL. They've got BJ Murray Jr. at third base on the IL.
Hmm.
Luis Vasquez at shortstop is on the IL, and the second baseman is also on the IL, which I'm forgetting who that is right now. But their entire infield is all out. So that's why they were
And
able to
you
call up
can't.
Matt Shaw, James Triantos, and Alcantara and slot them into the lineup immediately in
Yes.
AAA.
Were you thinking about Madrigal at second base, or was it another one?
Yeah, Madrigal. Yep,
Madrigal,
that's
yeah.
exactly what I was thinking of. Yep, yep.
Yeah, it's gonna be some interesting moves this offseason. Be interesting to see, because the other thing, if you can't get those free agents, whether you're gonna trade for like a Vlad Guerrero, if the Cubs are gonna go get that big bat somewhere, it's either gonna cost cash or it's gonna cost prospects. And kind of last thing I wanted you to get into today, you were talking at the deadline that none of the Cubs top 100 would be enough, or none of the guys on the rumored to be traded, Tyone and Horner at the deadline, would be enough to get you a major league ready, like top 40 prospect.
Yeah.
But I think taking a couple of these top 100 guys, maybe pairing them with a pitcher, some of the interesting bullpen arms, a major league bat, could potentially get you potentially maybe not quite a star, but a rising star, a guy that you think might
Yeah.
pop in the next 2 years.
Yeah, I was gonna say it depends on take the Blue Jays for example with Vlad Guerrero, right? If the Cubs were to I don't I hate speculating trades because it's just so difficult and it's
Sure.
dependent year to year. But say for example if they I think getting Vlad, if you traded James Triantos, Owen Casey, and Kevin Alcantara, that could get you Vlad. Now you'd have to weigh the benefits to the downside of that. Like you lose
Mhm.
3 top 100 prospects, you lose 3 of your top 7 guys, and you're getting Vlad Guerrero. And he's obviously amazing. He's an amazing player. So, but I think that's what you would have to do in order. I mean, you look at Isak Paredes. He got Christopher Morel, who is a Major League Baseball player. Now he hasn't been good, but like there's a lot of positives
Oh, yeah.
with Chris Morel. And you traded Hunter Biggie, who's arguably the top relief prospect in the Cubs system.
Hmm.
And then you get Ty Johnson, who, like I mentioned earlier, is the third best pitching prospect in the organization. As for Isak Paredes, there's a
Yes.
big difference between Isak Paredes and Vlad Guerrero Jr.
Yes.
So like, yeah, if people out there listening, if you're excited to trade James Triantos, Kevin Alcantara, and Owen Casey for Vlad Guerrero, it might take that. It might take more. It might take a little
Yeah.
more than that. It might take a little less. I'm not sure, but that's that's where that's where my mind wanders to first is those 3 guys, is 3 top 100 prospects. And there's just so few trades that happen these days with dealing away guys like that.
Yeah. It is easier in the off season to deal starters for starters, because like no contender who wants a piece is going to give up a starter, because that just sets them back. But in the off season, you can maybe they can find a team to sort of rejuggle rosters with and fix the profile. But it'll be interesting to follow.
That's true.
The other thing is, we talked a little bit about it, but the Cubs are now finally getting big high velo arms up to the bullpen, which is nice to see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm between Luke Little, Porter Hodge, Daniel Palencia. We saw Hunter Biggie before he got traded. Like that, there are the high velo arms there, and it's taken a while.
It has.
But we've kind of watched these guys jump up to the system. We've kind of watched it all happen, and I don't know. Porter Hodge is. I like Porter Hodge a lot, dude.
I want to see him get some closing chances.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that he not only does he throw hard, but the fastball is just super unique. The slider is really, really good. It's always been really, really good. That slider has been. So like he's got 2+ pitches, and that's what like the stun. We talk about the velo, and I think I kind of lump the velo with like the stuff into like the pure like nastiness of the stuff. Like it's all together. Like Luke Little obviously has nasty stuff.
Yes.
Now finding the zone a little bit more frequently is important, but Hunter Biggie had nasty stuff. The reliever the Cubs just got from the Yankees as a part of the Mark Leiter Jr. deal, Jack Neely, has really, really good stuff.
Yes.
Michael Arias hits high 90s on the fastball, and the changeup is really, really good. There's relievers there, and the Cubs have I don't know. I say it all the time. I trust the Cubs with relievers, whether it's their ability to remake certain veteran relievers and make them better once they get claimed off waivers, a la Julian Merriweather or Mark Leiter, or it's now we're seeing it with prospects coming with the system too. And like the Cubs could come in with like literally an empty bullpen next year in Chicago, like, oh, like we literally have nobody. I'd be like, oh, like they'll figure something out. Like they'll figure it out because like they always do. You know, I know that every fan base's favorite team has the worst bullpen in baseball. But Cubs fans should never feel that way, even when they're performing poorly, about the Cubs bullpen.
Well, I think this year too, it took them longer this year, but they got crushed by injuries in the first 2 months.
Bad. Yeah.
Hey,
It was rough. So
one last question before I send you out. Caleb Killian, is he going to get another shot at starter, or is he going to wind up in the bullpen?
I would love to see him wind up in the bullpen, and see just how this stuff plays. I know that he's been in the rotation, back to he was in the bullpen. Now he's back in the rotation in Iowa. Throw him in the bullpen. I just don't know what to make of him at this point. I have him off my top 40 prospects in the Cubs system.
He looks so good in spring training, though.
He looked good in spring training, and he's looked good in his return. It's just so much of an unknown, and when there's so much of that unknown, it's like, why make him a starter?
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? Like it's when there's that much unknown, like throw him in the bullpen in Chicago. If he's getting outs in Chicago in the bullpen, like then you can like next year, the year after, like let's move him back to the rotation, see what we can do with him. I just want to see if he can get whiffs. I need him to get whiffs in Chicago. That's what I need. And the first place, in my opinion, that's going to happen is the bullpen. So like, he's been really good. He's been really good since he returned. I think that it's fun to see the fastball touching high 90s, but at the same time, like he touched high 90s with the fastball prior to all the injuries, and he was bad. Right. You know, so like, I don't know what's different. I don't know if there's a different shape with the fastball that I can't pick up. I'm not knowledgeable enough in terms of like the fastball shape. I know when I really see it, and I haven't seen it with Caleb Killian.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's exciting to see him do what he's been doing, you know?
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on again. I know you got to get out for some day job actual activity. I think I do too. But where can people find you, Greg?
Yeah, you can find the Cubs on Deck podcast anywhere where you listen to podcasts, anywhere where you listen to the show, Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, all that good stuff. And then also on the Northside Bound YouTube channel. So go search Northside Bound on YouTube, and you can find the Cubs on Deck podcast there. You can find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. You can find my writing. I don't write as much. I do mostly just the podcast, but over at northsidebound.com. But that's where you can find me. I appreciate it, Mike.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on again. I appreciate it.
Yep, we'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Thank you for joining us today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and review wherever it is you get your podcasts, and share the episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS+. And check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/CubsPS+, to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS+ podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!